Welcome to this episode of the Talent Forge, where we are shaping the future of training and development. I am joined by special guest Emily Sander. Welcome to the show, Emily.
Thanks for having me, Jay.
Super excited about this conversation. And before we dive into the cool things that you're doing, I'd love for the audience to have a chance to get to know you just a little bit better. So, Emily, tell us your story. How did you get into this talent development, executive coaching space, and what brought you along this journey?
Yeah, so I started my career at large companies like Microsoft and Amazon. I was actually a tester for the original Kindle device. So back
Wow.
when people were like, e-reader, what? That was me working on that with the team in '07. We launched that, and then I worked for a series of small to medium, I would say technology-based companies. All of those were private equity backed. So rapid growth, like scale it, grow it. And throughout that series of companies, I got opportunities for leadership roles at an accelerated rate. So I had to learn, like, I was in a board meeting and everyone basically turned to me and was like, Emily, you know how to run an international client management team and build it from scratch, don't you? And in my head, I was like, no, no, I
Little
do not. But
baptism
out
by
loud, I was
fire.
like, I know, I was like, yes, yes, I do. So I walked back to my office and I literally remember typing into Google, like, how do you build an international client management team? So kind of learn, trial by fire and those things. Um, in parallel to that, I also had teams, so people management and people reporting to me, which I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I bought like 12 books. I went to community college classes. I tried to learn as quickly as I could because I wanted to be a good leader for my team and I wanted to serve them well and represent them well at leadership team meetings and things like this. So that was a steep, steep, steep learning curve. Through great mentors and a lot of good people along the way, I was successful in those roles, and my corporate career rather, culminated in the role as chief of staff for a digital marketing company. So a chief of staff is the right hand partner to the CEO and oversees company wide initiatives. Um, and then I moved into coaching full time. So for a series of circumstances, I had a decision point to go another rung up the corporate ladder or to put all the chips on the table to my coaching practice. And I did the latter. And I get to wake up every day and do the favorite part of my day, which was the mentoring and the guiding and the coaching aspects of all the other roles I had. So that's fantastic. Because I was a chief of staff and I had the coaching credentials, I had a whole bunch of chiefs of staff approach me for coaching. They were asking really good questions. There weren't a lot of good resources out there. So I wrote a book on the chief of staff role. I have a podcast on it. So now I specialize in coaching chiefs of staff and their principals and also companies who want to set that role up well. So in terms of like talent development and talent assessment, that's where I would come into play there.
Okay, that's so cool. And congratulations on the book. We'll make sure that we get a link to that book on the Chief of Staff in the show notes. Let's talk about that for a second. So, because this is such a cool pathway that you've taken, right? Like being in the corporate world, and I've talked to a couple of different coaches that had that opportunity, spent some time in the corporate world, stepped out of that space, and none of them are focused on chief of staff. So I think chief of staff is one of the places that a good trainer or coach or internal talent development team, they need to have a good relationship with the chief of staff.
Mhm.
Oftentimes it seems that the chief of staff is the one that's going to be driving initiatives, might be the person that's telling the talent development team, hey, we need training on X, Y, or Z. They seem to have the finger on the pulse. Help us understand that chief of staff role, maybe at a broader scale, and how that relates to talent development professionals.
Yeah, so I mean, it depends on the company. So if you say chief of staff, today that's an emerging role. So it can mean a lot of things. Like a chief of staff at a startup is different than chief of staff at Intel. But there's typically overlap with HR and or talent development, training and development. And that again depends on the stage of company and the needs of the company. But you know, I was in charge of rolling out performance reviews for the first time. Like people
Mm.
were doing that on napkins or not doing that at all. And so I worked with like HR and training and development. Hey, we need to roll this out, but we had a whole layer of new managers. They were operations managers, so that level, and we had four first-time managers. So they were like, how do I give a performance review? What do I do? And so
Mm.
we worked with our training team to develop that basically crash course for them. So that's very much where me, the COO, head of HR, and training and development came together and said, okay, here's kind of the what we're trying to get to, the end goal. Let's talk about some ideas to get there. And training and development was a huge part of that.
Well, I want to jump on something that you said there, and this is audience, listen. She said together they sat down and did this. It wasn't a directive, it wasn't here, there, or anything else. That's the kind of relationships that we need to be building as talent development inside of an organization, to be that collaborative partner rather than the, hey, go get this done because, we've got a perspective, and so does HR, and so does the chief of staff. And together, I think, is one of the operative words. So thank you for saying that, Emily.
You're welcome.
So uh, in coaching now, as you're kind of coaching in this, and obviously chief of staff would be considered C-suite, what are some of the things that you experience as a coach working with probably some of the higher performers inside of an organization?
Yeah, I mean, I was just talking to someone the other day who's the very first chief of staff at this company. So she's kind of defining this role as she goes, and she is reporting. It's kind of a split structure to two principals, which is not unheard of, but not typical. And these are like original co-founders, right? So this is their baby. Um, they have
Mm.
strong personalities. They want things done a certain way. They've been the king of the castle for a long, long time, and so um, almost I was coaching her on how to coach them because the way they add value to their company is changing. They can't do what they were doing before and still be successful, which is part of why they brought in a chief of staff. But I think there's kind of those dynamics. It's often okay, we've brought in this chief of staff, there's an existing, maybe COO or CTO or something else, and they're like, who is this person? Like, do I have a a constraint getting to the CEO now where before I was direct to the CEO? So there's all those kind of personalities where I think um, HR, recruiting and hiring, talent development can help be clear about what the roles are and who's
Mhm.
in charge of what and how the organization is structured and works together. And that can certainly be at the leadership level, but also to senior leaders, to mid-level management, all the way down to rank and file folks. I think it's really important to know, like, would I see this person at like the all company meeting or in my breakout meeting over here, like, who is that and kind of what are they up to in general and how do I best interact with that person? I think there's a lot of internal communication and knowledge transfer that can be helpful there.
Okay, so this is fascinating. As a
Mhm.
co-founder of a company, as a
Mhm.
CEO of a company, I've had to learn to let go of some things, and that was not an easy pathway for me. One of the things that I heard you say that I really, really appreciate and like is you're coaching your chief of staff or your client on how to coach the co-founder, and the co-founders are the two principals. And I think that's so important. As a trainer, we don't always think that we have to coach or train the person that's hiring us or the person that's bringing us in. We just feel like, okay, well, they're bringing us in, they're hiring us, or we work for them, and therefore there's no coaching. But how is that process look for you? Because that can be daunting sometimes, of saying, wait a
Oh yeah.
second, now I've got to run the staff. I'm the chief of staff. So I'm already having all of these and I have to coach my boss. How do you navigate that conversation to start off with, Emily?
Yeah, I mean, for this particular case, it was identifying what's important to them. So
Yeah.
like what's most important to them. And in their case, it was revenue. It was top line revenue. They had a goal to hit for 12 to 18 months, and their board was putting pressure on them to hit these targets. Like the board came in, gave them the investment, millions of dollars, and they're like, "Show me my return." So that was front and center. So basically, the chief of staff and I said, "All right, let's tee this conversation up, frame it around." We're both wanting this. We both want the company to do well. We both want to grow this thing like exponentially. Like, I want you to look really good to the board. And in order to do that, like part of my job is to make sure that you're spending your time and energy in the most appropriate places and that other people are able to step in and take on other things. You're the CEO. you have the authority to do things that other people don't. You have the name recognition in the industry. You have, you can throw in the big guns to these really important meetings with strategic partners and potential M&A people. So that's where we need you. We don't need you saying this
In the
comma
day to
should go
day.
here in this sentence, or
Yeah.
going through all of the Jira tickets every day like you used to, which used to be fine, but not at this level. So lifting that person out of those things and just identifying it in terms of, look, we want this. My job is to get you there and look good on the way. And so here's what I think you need to be focused on. And that seemed to work well for this particular combination of individuals.
Well, it's so powerful and a script, literally. So, audience, take this, listen to it. Hey, what is it that's most important to you? Whether that's getting good employees in place, whether that is having revenue, or whether that is growing the opportunities for staff, whatever that is. Okay, that's our North Star. We're both
Yeah.
trying to get to that place. Now, here's what I need from you to be able to do that, and being able to have those conversations, because too often I think in the world of talent development, we get directives, right? It's somebody says,
Mhm.
build me a sales training. And it's just like, okay, well, sales training may not actually get us to where we need, but there's this fear of having a conversation with leadership or having a conversation with the boss and coaching them to say, what is it that you're trying to accomplish? What would a good outcome be? How do we know that sales isn't working right now
Yeah.
before we start, chasing our tail and trying to put together something that's ultimately not going to lead to success? So I love how you have sort of framed that as coaching the boss or coaching the bosses and creating the conditions of a collaborative partnership. Now, Emily, I guess my question is when you're onboarding as an executive coach and working with these C-suites, when you're onboarding somebody, what does that process look like? And I'm really curious because in many cases, at least according to our behavioral assessments that we've done, and we've done a lot of different C-suites, there's some strong personalities that are going to hit those C-suites.
Oh,
There's
yes.
some high performers. Obviously, they got there somewhere or another, and usually it's by kicking ass and taking names, right?
Sure did. Yep.
So you've got strong behavioral patterns that have probably been created over the course of their careers. And at that point in time, you're bringing them in to essentially shift mindsets, behaviors, whatever it is, to help them be more effective, even where they're at. So what does that onboarding process look like for you?
The key word I would throw out there is clarity. So making it clear what their role is, making it clear what other people's roles are and how they're going to interact. And then also making like the onboarding plan clear to the candidate and everyone else. Um, I've seen like disastrous onboarding where they make the hire and then do nothing else. And no one even greets the person at the door. And I was like, face palm, what is happening right here? And then I've had the opposite where like they are greeted with a like monogrammed little gift basket and they're like, here's your desk and here's everything teed up for you and all that. So much different experience. But um, I would say overall, the first 90 days obviously are imperative and people need to be aware this person is coming on. There needs to be a plan to get them integrated and up to speed on the company and the internal processes and the product and where the bathroom is and the team and all that stuff, just so they feel most comfortable. And there's always going to be that point where, it's extra time to train them and they're not quite contributing yet, and you want to get them to that tipping point where they do start contributing and they do start pulling their weight as quickly as possible. So you want to make that as painless for the person going through it and the people involved in it as possible. So that's like high level, and if you want more detail in a certain area, let me know. But the first
Yeah.
90 days are critical, and a chief of staff, I would onboard C-suite executives and I would have this stuff lined up. So it's like my job is to get you ramped up as quick as fast as humanly possible, knowing that like a CTO might take 12 months to ramp up, but those
Mhm.
first 90 days have to be structured and kind of, I'm going to guide you this way and then it might change from there, but I'm going to get you a running start out the gates to your role.
Well, and it's so important because what we often see, and this is the fascinating thing about onboarding. It's almost like everybody knows they need to do it, but nobody really has the perfect playbook for it, right? And it's going to be different in different industries because I've seen exactly what you're talking. I do a lot of organizational culture consulting. And one of the first things that I look at is how are you onboarding your new hires and how are you onboarding your existing hires that have been promoted into new positions? And they're like, what do you mean onboarding them into new positions? I'm like, you're not onboarding them into new
Brand new
positions
role.
because that's a new role. Considered a new hire. How are you getting them up to speed? What are you providing them? And they're like, and it's a huge, huge gap. And it's no wonder that Gartner research shows that 48% of everybody that gets promoted is seen as underperforming after 2 years.
Yeah. Well, the thing I found is one of the biggest leaps is when you go from an IC individual contributor to a people manager. Because
Huge.
just because you are good at, doing your individual contributor job, which is great, does not equal a good people manager. Those are two
Nope.
entirely different skill sets. So when this poor, top performer gets thrown into people management, it's like, okay, well, you are good at scuba diving, so now you can fly a plane, right? Whoa, what? So that's like a whole other thing. Um, the next one is when you're managing people who have someone underneath them. That's a whole other ball game as well. And then when you hit like C-suite, that's just you have to change your whole game. It's like what got you here won't get you there type of thing. All
Oh
these
yeah.
different points in the ladder. But um, like the first day, just to get real tactical and practical, like the person's like amped up, right? It's like the first day they're trying to prove themselves, they're trying to like take it all in and make a good impression and all this stuff. Everything's new. So just know they take in about like 40 to 60% of what they're going through. So show them the basics, get them comfortable with stuff, get them exposed to stuff. Um, I always would give them an industry overview and
Mm.
then a company overview because that gave them the containers or framework to then place all the information they were going to get in the next coming days, weeks, months. So if I could just get that framework set for them, we're like, here's like the wooden beams of a house when you're building a house, like here's the
Yeah.
framework. And then as you go along, you're going to build the walls and the scaffolding and the cabinets or
Yeah.
whatever. But I wanted to get that foundation established early so they kind of know where to place things. And as they get data points coming in, they'll be able to hopefully connect the dots faster.
And I think that's so fascinating because even in hearing you describe sort of that executive coaching, so I've done a lot of management work for new and emerging managers. I'm actually just launched a management accelerator program
Oh, cool.
based on what we were doing at Ford because it was the same thing. And I definitely referenced Marshall Goldsmith's work. What got you here won't get you there. That shift in mindset of being good at something to moving into a role of like, hey, you're good at this. I'm going to move you up, and now you're going to manage 6 people and get them good at this. And they're like, but I'm not good at getting people good at getting the job done.
And sometimes they
So,
feel bad because they're like,
yeah.
I was a top performer and now I'm underperforming and they don't like that. So you got to
Yeah,
help
so
them.
either they micromanage, fail to delegate,
Hmm.
or anything else. So as you're making that transition, though, and so I've worked with that sort of frontline manager quite a bit. As they're making that transition from frontline manager into, say, the C-suite, what are some of the mindset shifts that they need to take on? Because now at this point in time, they're probably enterprise level, or in a larger organization, they'd be enterprise level and they may not have as much people management. They may only have two direct reports, which are the managers that are overseeing much larger teams. So, what kind of mindset shifts would they need to make in getting into that? So, say from sales to sales director to sales VP to whatever to chief of staff or whatever that might look like. How
Yeah.
do they have to shift their mindsets?
That's a broad question. That's a good question. I would answer that a few ways. So first of all, it's no longer about what I can do that makes me successful. It's what my team can do and what I can enable and empower my team to do. So your success is derived from your team. And that's a huge shift. It's not about you. It's not about what I can personally do. It's about what your team does. And I remember making the shift myself from like a IC to a people manager where I liked getting praise for what I accomplished. Like that's how I knew I was doing good. And it was a huge mindset shift to then say, oh, like other people are getting credit for things. but that's good because they're on my team. Okay, like this makes it good for everybody. So that was like a huge mental shift for me there. And then it's a matter of you will get to a point where you cannot know every technical detail. You
Mm.
cannot know the exact buttons to push to make a campaign go.
Bum, bum, bum,
Yeah.
bum, bum,
And
bum,
so there's
bum,
like,
bum.
oh, and people like want control, and
Yep.
sometimes they, swan dive in there and try to micromanage, which is disastrous. But you have to learn to trust people, and you have to learn how to train and coach people. So I obviously espouse a huge coach approach to management and say,
Mhm.
okay, like how do you assess talent? How do you put people in the right seats? Bring them on the bus and then get them in the right seats on the bus and all of those things. Like the if you think about an IC to a C-suite trajectory, when you're an IC, like 90% of your time should be spent on technical skills. Like that's what you need to be good at. And then as you go along, that becomes 50-50. And then as you move to like VP, SVP, C suite, you should be spending 90% of your time on leadership skills. It shouldn't be
Love that.
technical skills anymore. And so you have to be able to calibrate and know where you are. Now, in any of these levels, in any of these circumstances, you have to know enough about your department to manage it. So you have to have a working knowledge of everything that's going on. But if you actually know like every single tiny little, you're missing something else. You're spending your time in the wrong places. So I would just kind of keep that trajectory in mind. I see technical skills are the priority. As you move up and up and up, leadership skills become more and more and more of the priority.
Love that. So, and it's so interesting, right? Because we think about how often people do get promoted because of their technical skills and then don't have the management or leadership skills. And I think that that's a huge gap that a lot of our audience is really trying to overcome at this point. So, let me ask you this, Emily. If you were to say, all right, you're in this executive coaching, give me an example if you can, or how have you helped people sort of have that breakthrough moment? I know that, in working with coaches, I've had my own breakthrough moments where it's just like, aha, the light bulb turns on, and I can see the glee in my coach's face going, you finally got there. You know what I'm saying? Like, oh gosh, how did I miss this? How do you essentially bring people to some of those light bulb moments, whether that's a mindset shift from like getting away from the technical and into the more people leadership, or whether it's even something about their job that maybe they hadn't considered? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, so I mean, it's kind of learning how they see the world today. So if, like, for instance, they see the world like how I do good is by what I can personally do. If that's how they see the world today, then okay, it's you got to identify that, meet them where they're at, of course, and then peel that back or offer another perspective and say, hey, what about this one? It's like, oh, that one actually makes more sense. And that would make me feel better. And that is what my boss wants. So yeah, maybe it is how successful can I make my team? Okay, now that I have that in the realm of possibilities, like, okay, let me think about that. And then tactically, how would I go about doing that? So you kind of get into that conversation. But even just having that awareness they didn't have before could be like career changing, like life
Sure.
changing. So just understanding where they're at. If I remember I had a client who was like, Emily, can you help me speak up more at team meetings? I feel nervous. And I'm like, sure, absolutely. So, tell me what goes through your head when you walk into your leadership meeting on Thursdays. And she goes, I know that everyone thinks I'm stupid and I'm not a good communicator. And I was like, okay, so if you're walking in there with that going through your head, you are definitely going to show up a certain way. So let's unpack that a little bit and say, first of all, like, how do you know people, think you're stupid? Oh, well, they just look at me a certain way. Okay, well, maybe someone has resting, whatever face, or that's just their face, or they were tired, or whatever. So how do you know? And she was like, well, I guess I don't. I guess I'm assuming. And I'm like, okay. So what can you control? And let's focus on that. I can be clear. I can speak up when I think there's something to be added. And then, um, maybe it's I have value to add to this team. That's the mantra you have going in. Like I'm on this team for a reason. I need to speak up on behalf of my team and be a good ambassador for my team in this leadership group. And so changing some of those mindsets, what you believe affects how you feel. which affects the actions you take in the world. So if you've got the
Absolutely.
wrong story running in your head, then it's going to affect, like, oh, I feel nervous, I feel scared, I feel unworthy. And then, of course, you're going to show up in a certain way. So a lot of coaching, as you well know, is between the ears. Sometimes it is like, okay, here's some technical knowledge, or here's a framework for how to do a one-on-one. Like, we can talk about, the tactical pieces of that.
Tactic.
But yeah, and that's important too. Not
Yeah.
overlooking that at all, because some people are like, I don't know what that's supposed to look like,
Sure.
and so how am I supposed to divine that? But a lot of times it's the stuff going on in between their ears.
Well, and I'm so glad you said that. So one of my things is I always make a joke. I speak for a living. I am not a mathematician, but I do know one formula, and it is T plus F equals B. Thoughts plus feelings equals your behaviors. And it lines up so perfectly with what you said. And I think it's important too to kind of recognize you mentioned this in the framework of coaching, but I think it applies for training too. And when
Yeah,
we think about like, standing in front of an entire group, one of the things that a good trainer is going to know, hopefully they've been able to get some information in advance about what level they're at, what their mentality is, what the morale is. If you're able to have conversations with some of the potential participants and get a better idea of that, you're going to walk into that training way more prepared, way more ready to meet them where they're at.
totally. Yeah.
If you don't get that advanced, then even checking in right as you start, hey, how many of you are dealing with X, Y, and Z? If you see half of the hands go up and you're there to talk about X, Y, or Z, you better be having something for that other 50% of the group and meeting them where they are at as well. So I love that frame that you put on that, because I think it's really important that when coaching, when training, it's not about what we know, it's about where our participant is at and how do we get them to the next step, whatever that next step might be.
Yeah.
Now, I find this so fascinating, and I could probably talk to you about this for hours, Emily. But in my last question, I think that I'd love to hear your comments on executives get stuck just like all of us do, right? Like at some point in time in their career, maybe they were crushing it to start with, or maybe they're stuck, at the start line or whatever it is. But at some point in time, an executive is going to get stuck. And from a high performance mindset, which generally a lot of them are going to have, that can be debilitating. Or if
Mhm.
they find themselves in a barrier, whether it's a chief of staff or anybody else, they find themselves hitting a barrier that they just don't see themselves going over. How do you keep that sort of high performance machine mind running? What do you do to lubricate, the engine that's burning up inside of there as the wheels are spinning? I think it'd be an interesting perspective to hear from that executive level, or that coaching, that sort of
Yeah.
high executive level.
So, I mean, with a lot of high performers, the fact that they're on their growth edge and they're being challenged by something and they're even plateauing for a while can actually be a good sign.
Mm,
It can be that they're pushing themselves or trying something new, or they're pushing the envelope or pushing the market or pushing the industry. And so that can be a good thing. And sometimes it's just reminding them, hey, this is part of the process. And this feeling of failure is actually a sign of success. So there's like this framework that I have called the failure loop, but it's a string of individual loops connected. So it goes up and to the right, so a chain of loops, and
hmm
up and to the right is the direction of progress. And so that's the direction we all want to be going. But there's a certain part of an individual loop that goes back down into the left, which is not the direction we want to go.
hmm
But everyone has to go through that. And that's the phase where it's like, oh crap, something didn't go the way I wanted, or I'm stuck, or I'm really frustrated by this because I can't overcome it and I normally can. And in that part of the failure loop, you have a choice. You can sit there and drown in your pools of pessimism and declare yourself a failure and just stop. Or you can say, okay, I know where I am in this process. I need to figure out what lesson I need to learn and what I need to do differently going forward and apply that. And when you do that, you've just sprung yourself up to the next rung of the loop. So if you're consistently moving up and to the right over and over and over again through these series of individual loops, then that is a successful person. That is the definition of learning, and that is the definition of growing. And so, with many of these high performers, they bump their heads on the ceiling because they're going so fast and they're pushing so hard and they're at that growth
Mhm.
edge, it can be a sign of success. Now, there's many other circumstances where something else external might be going on or whatnot, but more often than not, there's at least an element of that failure loop in there.
I love that. So it's almost like helping them be prepared for the setback, the learning response from it, and then, all right, now what have you learned? Push forward again. But be ready for the next setback. You're gonna hit it. It's gonna, if you're pushing as hard as you are, you're gonna hit it. And then we're gonna do this same thing. Learn and push again. I really like that. So, uh, Emily, how would our audience, if they wanted to learn more about chief of staff or leadership training, leadership coaching, how would they get in touch with you?
Yeah, the best place to go is my website, which is nextlevel.coach. You can find everything there. I also have a podcast, which is called Leveraging Leadership, and I talk about some of these frameworks and I talk to a whole bunch of chiefs of staff and their principals and executives. So those are some good places to find me.
Incredible. We'll make sure those are in the show notes. Thank you so much, Emily, for your insights. And it's really nice to be able to get sort of a peek behind the curtain in executive coaching and really kind of drawing that out from that chief of staff or that chief financial officer, chief HR. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Pleasure. Thank you so much, Jay.
And thank you, audience, for tuning into this episode of the Talent Forge, where we are shaping the future of training and development.